How's it going, guys? I'm an avid herpetologist, and today's video is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be a bit of a rant video. So there's been a couple of articles that have been circulating over the last couple of weeks. This isn't new news, but it's new kind of to me. Like, I've kind of been aware that this has been going on, but I'm starting to see a new resurgence of a lot of articles on my news feeds and things like that talking about this. So I've been kind of wrestling with whether or not I wanted to make a video, and finally I've just decided to get my ramblings into one concrete little video here. So we're going to be talking about something that I am very passionate about, and that is Lolita. She is an orca who has been housed at the Miami Seaquarium for a little over 50 years. Now, Lolita, as I mentioned, is a killer whale. She's an orca, and cetaceans, which is any dolphins or whales being held in captivity, is a very controversial subject. I realize that there are probably going to be people watching this video who are going to have very strong feelings and very strong opinions on this topic, and that is fine. I do not want to discourage people from having their own feelings and opinions on this conversation. However, I do want this to be a conversation. There is a lot of misinformation that tends to circulate around the subject of cetaceans in captivity and orcas in particular. And I think it's incredibly important for us to have the conversation because being passionate and having strong opinions is fine, but if those opinions are based on incorrect information, that to me is a problem, especially when decisions are now being made based around that incorrect information that are going to be extremely detrimental to the health of the animal in question. So what am I talking about? Well, after 50 years, Miami Seaquarium has recently made the official announcement that they are working to release Lolita, or Tokite, or Toki. She has a couple of different names that people know her by. They are trying to release her back into the ocean. This is a big problem for a lot of reasons, both for Lolita herself as well as potentially the wild populations. There's just so many things that need to be talked about with this topic. Absolutely not going to be able to cover all of the information in this single video, but we're going to just talk about some of the bigger, what I consider to be more important talking points, just so I can kind of shed a little bit more light on what is happening, why I consider it important, and what I think needs to change. Now, before I do get into this, I want to make sure I am clearly presenting my own biases, because as I mentioned, this is going to be a very emotional topic for a lot of people, and I myself am very passionate about this. I wouldn't be surprised if I get a bit heated or emotional during this video, so please bear with me, and I apologize in advance for that. But just to give a bit of light to my own background, I actually do currently work at a zoo. I've been in the zoo and aquarium field for about 10 years now. It's been a very long time. I actually started as a volunteer at the aquarium up in Baltimore my first year out of high school back in 2013, and since that time have continually been in that field, working at that aquarium for a total of 8 years, and then continuing on to my current zoo where I actually work, even still now continuing on once every couple of weeks, even though I do have another full-time job that I do at this point. A lot of rambling, basically just to say that I do have my own biases, but I also have experience being around the subject material that we're going to be discussing today. I have experience working around cetaceans in captivity, not necessarily directly with them, but I've worked with trainers, I've worked with animal keepers, and I do have firsthand information about animals in captivity that I think a lot of people come at this particular discussion without. Now, I'm by no means an expert in this field, not even close, and I'm going to be giving a lot of opinions during this conversation. However, a lot of the information that I'm giving, things that I'm going to be approaching this with a amount of background knowledge that I've been accumulating since I was a kid. I've been passionate about zoos and aquariums since I was a child. It shaped the better part of my adult life and ultimately my career path. So it is something that I consider very important to talk about. So we're going to be getting into this. I just wanted to make sure I checked my biases again ahead of time. I'm also going to make sure that I clarify, even though I do work for a zoo, everything I'm saying in this video is either cold hard fact or an opinion of mine. I am not speaking on behalf of the zoo. I'm not speaking on behalf of the aquarium that I worked at. All of the things that I'm going to be talking about are coming from me and nobody else. Yeah, let's get into it. All right, so I kind of cherry-picked this article. This is a New York Times article that is just kind of talking about the conversation piece that I mentioned about Lolita. There are plenty of these articles circulating, but this is the one I'm going to be going through and just talking about because it kind of covers a lot of the important points that made me want to discuss this topic. Lolita the orca may swim free after decades at Miami Seaquarium. The killer whale, also known as Tokite, has been in captivity for more than 50 years. Amid increasing pressure, the Seaquarium has agreed to release her. Right off the bat, I am honestly extremely disappointed with the Miami Seaquarium for caving to peer pressure here. You guys are the ones who have housed Lolita for those 50 years. You guys are the ones who are responsible for her well-being and her health care, and it is incredibly disappointing to me to see that you guys have ultimately going to be moving towards her release. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of things happening behind the scenes and reasons and factors that I myself am not aware of, and I completely recognize and openly admit to that. However, I'm going to be talking about a lot of the factors that I am aware of that a lot of people may not be, who are coming at this with a more, or I guess a less involved perspective on the subject. So right off the bat, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Not a good look, guys. The killer whale Lolita, which has entertained generations of visitors with colossal leaps and sloppy belly flops that splashed crowds at the Miami Seaquarium, will be returning to her native waters after more than 50 years in captivity. So one of the biggest conversation pieces that people like to bring up when they're discussing cetaceans in captivity has to do with their lifespan. It's a very common misconception that cetaceans, dolphins and whales, under human care, live significantly shorter lives than they would out in the ocean. First of all, that's absolutely untrue. Dolphins, especially, have actually been found to have longer than normal lifespans than their wild counterparts. Now, do some cetaceans in captivity pass away early? Yes. Of course they do. There are going to be outliers if you're talking about mortality rates. The same is true for humans. The same is true for any species of animal out there. You're going to have situations where animals, or even people, pick up exotic diseases, pick up genetic deformities, things that we have no control over and are going to cause awful things to happen to the animals in question. The problem is when you're talking about these lifespan expectancies, number one, you have to look at averages. Number two, in order to prove that an animal is having a significantly shorter lifespan in captivity, you have to not only prove that it's happening, you have to prove that the reason it's happening, number one, is not also present in the wild, or number two, is significantly more likely to be happening in captivity than in the wild. The bottom line is animals in the wild, and I know this is going to rattle some people's worlds here, animals in the wild still get diseases. They still get genetic deformities. Animals in the wild don't live full, extensive lives all the time. In fact, as the world continues to progress and we see increases in pollution and other harmful factors affecting these animals, you're going to see these animals dying sooner because they have to deal with factors that don't exist under human care. Think about things like competition for food. Overfishing is a significant problem for a lot of large marine mammals. Compete with other animals as well as with people who are stealing their food supply. You don't have to worry about that under human care. You have a constant, steady supply of food. You also have to worry about, as I mentioned, pollutants, things that are going to be in the water that shouldn't be there. That can include not only plastics and things that can be ingested that are harmful to the animals. You're also talking about potential toxins, things like oils that can wind up in the water that can also be extremely detrimental to the animal's health. Rather than just saying, oh, well, these animals live shorter lives in captivity, they're much better off in the wild, you have to prove that not only are they living significantly shorter lives in captivity, which you're going to have a hard time doing when a lot of animals are outliving their wild counterparts under human care, you also have to prove fundamentally that these animals are living shorter lives because of factors that are strictly tied to being under human care. If these animals in the wild are still getting diseases and passing away early, that's not necessarily the fault of people. It could be, but it can also be a situation where the animals are just highly susceptible to environmental pressures, and things like that are going to happen no matter where the animal lives. But anyways, the other big important thing, we're talking about an animal that has lived more than 50 years in captivity. Later on in the article, it kind of talks about the year that Lolita was ultimately brought into human care from the ocean, and she has lived in the Miami Seaquarium for 50 years. Guys, if an animal is suffering, they aren't going to live for 50 years. If an animal is not living in conditions that are healthy for it, if they are living in areas that are considered stressful or dangerous to that animal, not only are they going to die quickly, they're not going to do things like reproduce, which is something that animals, especially orcas and dolphins in human care, have been documented well doing. Animals are not going to breed in a situation they consider dangerous. They don't want to put an potential offspring in that situation. Think about that. The biggest talking point is the fact that she has been at the Miami Seaquarium for 50 years. That's not an insignificant amount of time. She would not have lived that long if she was suffering or unhappy. The animals orcas especially, are vastly intelligent. They are incredibly smart animals. And if they are unhappy for 50 years, they're not going to live that long. They are going to pass away sooner. We continue on with the conversation. The plan to release the orca, also known as Tokite, is the result of a binding agreement among the Dolphin Company, which operates the Seaquarium, the Miami-Dade County, and animal rights activists. Now, I'm sure I'm probably going to have some people watching this who consider themselves animal rights activists. First and foremost, I think it's important to make sure that I mention there are going to be extremists no matter what passionate, emotional subject we're discussing, and the animal rights activists are absolutely in that category. The problem is that just because you believe an animal shouldn't be in captivity, that doesn't give you the right to make decisions about what is best for that animal. In my opinion, if you are not the person working with the animal every single day, if you're not the one giving up holidays, family time to be there and take care of those animals, it's not your call whether or not those animals are doing well. I trust the word of the keepers and the trainers and the scientists and environmentalists and all of these people who are working closely with those animals, who have decades of experience in the field, who are telling me these animals are thriving, not just living, thriving. I trust their word because they are the educated ones on the subject. They have the firsthand experience. Now, again, I may not have that experience, but I do trust the people who do. The most important thing is Tokite's long-term well-being, and together, guided by the experts, will continue to do what is best for her. No, you won't. You're trying to release her. That's not what's best for her. Eduardo Albert, chief executive of the Dolphin Company, said, "This is a very special day," and added, "This is beyond Lolita. She is going to become a symbol." Yeah, kind of like Kiko became a symbol, right? You guys still think Kiko was a success story? We'll talk about him in a bit. This is one of the biggest problems I have with this subject. Lolita shouldn't be your symbol. She's not just a political prop for you to use, so you can throw her back into the ocean and just say that you did your good deed for the day and just leave her there. Now, obviously, there are going to be people who are still working with Lolita and making sure that she's properly adjusting if this move does come to pass, and it sounds like it will. But the problem is a lot of people who are pushing for this so fervently have absolutely no clue or care about what's going to happen after she's put back in the ocean. They're going to say, cool, we did it, we let her go. I can sleep well at night knowing that I helped this animal. But in all seriousness, like, if you don't know these animals' day-to-day lives, why are you telling me that this is a special day? This is beyond Lolita. She's going to become a symbol. At the news conference, Jim Irsay, a philanthropist and owner of the National Football League team, the Indianapolis Colts, said it was all about helping the orca. "I know Lolita wants to get to free waters. Do you now? Because I know that if I'm looking for educated, well-versed information on what's best for a giant marine mammal, the first place I'm going to look for it is the coach of an NFL team. I appreciate that you care about Lolita, but stop pretending like you know what's best for her. You don't." Mr. Irsay added that the plan is not a short-range commitment, it's a long-range commitment. That's very true, and I'm glad that you recognize that. But how long are you going to be committed to it, Mr. Irsay? How long after you put Lolita back into the ocean are you going to stay involved with her release process? Genuinely curious. You're willing to back the finances, which is fantastic. That's great and all. But do you actually want to stay involved, or are you just here to make a nice little statement and then kind of disappear back into the shadows and you don't really care once she's back in the ocean again? Lolita has to be taught how to catch fish again, Mr. Irsay said. She doesn't know how to do that anymore. She's been in captivity too long. Correct. Are you going to teach her how to catch fish again? Lolita doesn't know. Not only does Lolita not know how to catch fish of her own, Lolita also needs very specially made food, from what I've heard from accounts of people who know people at the Miami Seaquarium. Now, again, this is not firsthand information, but I've heard that she actually needs specially prepared food because she is now at an age where she is basically considered geriatric. She is in older years of orca life, and she needs assistance with things like that. This isn't even something that's just true for orcas. In fact, the zoo that I work at, we have an elephant who actually needs her food blended up because part of an elephant's natural life cycle is as they get older, they have what's called marching molars. Their teeth in their mouth basically keep moving towards the front and chunks break off. That's part of an elephant's natural life cycle. Once they reach a certain age, those teeth basically run out and they lose those teeth. And some elephants in the wild can actually die to starvation because they can't eat food anymore once that happens. In captivity, under human care, we have the ability to provide them extended care, which is good for a lot of reasons. Obviously, one of the counterpoints is, well, would you rather have a longer life in captivity? Would you rather have a shorter life out in the wild? I personally would rather have the longer life in captivity, especially when you're talking about animals like elephants and orcas, animals that can be part of breeding programs for incredibly vulnerable species that are at very serious risk of being wiped out. There's actually an animal species. It's called the vaquita dolphin. If you've never heard of these guys, they're so stinking cute. The vaquita dolphins are like tragically endangered. As of the time of making this video in 2023, many experts think there are only 10 vaquitas left in the world. Not in oceans, not in human care, in the world. 10 of these animals left. And the problem with vaquita dolphins in particular is it's not for lack of trying to save them. We've actually supported a lot of really awesome attempts at trying to keep the vaquita dolphins safe. We've tried to introduce them into human care, and they just haven't made it. They don't survive. For whatever reason, we can't seem to get the formula just right. And because of that, we are at very serious risk of losing these animals from the face of the planet forever. Like, no going back. They're gone, which is incredibly tragic. And I don't want to see that happening to other species. One of the biggest benefits of animals under human care is the ability to participate in these well-regulated breeding programs. For those of you unfamiliar, there exists something called an SSP, which stands for Species Survival Plan. A lot of zoos and aquariums all over the world participate in these breeding programs, and it basically functions like a dating app where you can communicate with other places that have these animals and find good matches. And one of the benefits of the SSPs is it gives us the opportunity to monitor things like genetic diversities, making sure that valuable individuals who have not had the opportunity to breed yet or haven't had many offspring can get good mates and continue their unique genetics in the population, which keeps the population strong. Like, there's so much that goes into SSPs and keeping these animals around, and orcas and elephants are both members that are able to participate in these programs. So yeah, I know I went off the rails a little bit there, but seriously, this is one of the reasons that this topic is so important to me, is the amount of insane good that has come from being able to have these animals as part of these captive breeding programs. It's irreplaceable. In fact, I'm going to pause for just a moment, and I want to show you guys this cute little animal right here. This is called a Panamanian golden frog. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with these adorable little amphibians, they're actually toads, but they're actually functionally extinct in the wild. They don't exist on planet Earth outside of human care. Now, a big reason for this is actually outside pathogens. There was a fungus that got introduced to their native range down in Panama that ultimately just wiped the population out virtually overnight, which is incredibly sad, incredibly tragic. I've actually had the incredible privilege of getting to work closely with Panamanian golden frogs. They're such a cool species, but they don't exist anymore outside of human care. The only reason they still exist on the planet is all of the hard work and dedication that keepers have done to keep them around. Now, orcas, thankfully, are not in a position where they are likely to get wiped out like this, but orca populations are still being monitored closely because they are a vulnerable species. Marine mammals as a whole are unfortunately vulnerable to a lot of environmental factors that are affecting marine life right now. So having a few populations, even if it's just as a safety net, under human care to keep these populations around, I can't put words to how important it is. But anyways, let's get back to the article here. Lolita has been at the Miami Seaquarium on Virginia Key since 1970, after she was separated from her pod and captured in the Pacific Northwest. Now, this is something I want to make sure I'm talking about, because one of the big talking points that a lot of anti-captivity advocates want to bring up is it's awful that these animals were harvested from the ocean. I agree with you. It is unfortunate, and I don't like that these animals were brought in from the ocean, which is why it is a good thing that it doesn't happen anymore. The vast majority of animals that are still under human care right now either were brought in before it was outlawed. In this case, we're talking about an orca that is more than 50 years old, or these are animals that were bred in captivity and have never experienced life in the wild. These are animals that are fully reliant on humans in order to live, which you may have certain feelings about, but at the end of the day, is not an inherently bad thing for any reason other than emotion or morality. If these were orcas that were being harvested out of the ocean in today's times, I would be right there with you, and we can protest that practice together. I don't think that should still be happening. But the reality is these were brought into captivity under a very different set of circumstances that no longer occurs these days. And you have to take that into consideration. This is not an animal that knows how to survive in the wild anymore. She was brought in more than 50 years ago, 1970. You can't just drop her in the ocean and expect her to just magically pick up her survival instincts again. It just doesn't work that way. The animal rights advocacy organization, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, welcomed the news of Lolita's possible release on Thursday. PETA and kind people everywhere, you guys are so pretentious, I can't stand PETA. PETA and kind people everywhere have been demanding her freedom from the hashtag Miami Seaquarium for years, the organization said on Twitter. I hate PETA so much. I realize that y'all see the name People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals and assume that, oh, well, they must be educated. They surely must know what they're talking about. They don't. Look into some of the things that these people are advocating for. These people don't know the first thing about animals in captivity. They're an emotionally driven group whose entire arguments basically boil down to personification and anthropomorphism, assigning human characteristics to animals that just simply can't experience the same spectrum of emotion that human beings can. Now, as I mentioned, orcas are incredibly intelligent. They are capable of sentient thought to a certain extent. However, they are not human beings. They can't think or feel to the same extent that we do. They don't have critical thought. They can feel scared and afraid, but they can also feel joy. They can also feel pleasure and connections and things like that. The problem with the arguments that organizations like PETA make is you just assume that an animal has the emotional capacity to be miserable under human care, but you never even entertain the possibility that animals also have the emotional capacity to feel happy and content under human care. You can't say that they have the emotional spectrum on one side and lack it on the other. That's not how it works. And we can have a discussion about the conditions the animals are kept in, because especially with big animals like orcas, the spaces and the habitats as the animals are given under human care, they can be open to discussion and debate about whether they should be improved. I think that is a completely fine thing to have the discussion about. But you can't sit here and lecture me about how miserable these animals are under human care without even considering the possibility that, hey, maybe these animals are actually doing fine. Maybe they are happy under human care. Maybe they get everything they need. Maybe their needs are all met. Maybe they have connections with people and enrichment and mental stimulation that they need in order to live full and enriching lives. It's just so frustrating. Like I said, PETA, you guys are so pretentious. This terminology, PETA and kind people everywhere, look at us. We're right by default. And if you agree with us, you are a kind person. Oh, that perspective just boils my blood. I can't stand these people. The Seaquarium said the whale, which had stopped performing last year as her health declined, is 57, about 20 feet long, and 7,000 pounds. She remains in an 80-foot long and 35-foot wide tank, but is no longer being exhibited. There's a couple of talking points here. First of all, I think it's important to mention that they noticed that her health was declining last year. Once again, just because an animal's health is declining doesn't mean it's the fault of the people who are taking care of her. Lolita is 57 years old. This may come as a surprise, but people develop more health issues as they age too. That's actually very normal and very natural. Again, in order to prove that this is the fault of the people taking care of her, you also have to prove that there is a significant population of 57-year-old whales out in the wild that just magically don't have any health issues. I promise you're not going to find many. It also goes on to mention the dimensions of her tank. Now, as I mentioned, we can have a discussion about whether or not the habitats that these animals are being kept in are large enough or not. I think that is a very reasonable thing to discuss. However, if you are going to say that the dimensions that are given here are not large enough for an orca, it is on you to provide the dimensions that you consider large enough for an animal of that size. Because here's the thing, the ocean is a big place, but it's still not infinite. So how can you prove to me that an ocean is big enough for an orca to be happy? What do you consider the exact footage that an animal needs in order to live a happy and healthy life? Because here's the thing, this is not something that just kind of gets considered willy-nilly. They didn't just kind of, randomly throw out a pit of concrete and then fill it with water and throw an orca in there. Not how it works. Here's the thing, Miami Seaquarium and all sorts of zoos and aquariums around the world are held to very rigorous standards when it comes to the conditions that they keep their animals in. They undergo rigorous testing to make sure that the habitats that they're providing for their animals meet proper standards. Now, each of these standards is of course going to be a little bit different, but there are tons and tons of organizations that exist strictly for the purpose of making sure that these standards are being met and these animals are living in conditions that are appropriate for them. This does include proper spacing, because animals like orcas are very physical. They need to be moving a lot. They need proper exercise, but you can do that within a limited space, such as, I'm going to use the no-no word, a tank. The habitats that are being provided to cetaceans do need to reach certain size standards so the animals have ample room to move, to exercise, and things of that nature. But that doesn't mean that they require infinite amount of space in order to live a happy, healthy lifestyle. These animals can get all of their proper nutrition, all their proper exercise, all of their proper stimulation within the boundaries of these given habitats. So that pretty much sums up the article, but there's still a lot of things that I think need to be discussed on this topic, so I'm going to go into some of those now. To begin with, we're going to be talking about why I think it is so potentially harmful to be moving Lolita back into open waters again. First of all, the number one thing we have to talk about is pathogens. I've already talked a little bit about it, about how these animals can get sicknesses, illnesses, and other diseases. The same goes for animals in the wild as it does for animals in captivity. When you are releasing an animal that has basically lived in a quarantine zone its entire life, you can't just be like, all right, well, now that you're the equivalent of an 80-year-old, we're going to go ahead and take you to a crowded concert and just kind of let you hang out for a bit. Like, first of all, there's going to be diseases and pathogens that this animal has never been introduced to that all of a sudden it's going to be exposed to and could very easily take over the animal and kill it. This has already been documented with plenty of other cetaceans that have been under human care and were tried to be reintroduced. While there may be some success stories, there are a lot of negative ones where the animals get put back into the oceans, live maybe a year before they ultimately just die, which is incredibly heartbreaking. These are animals that were probably living fantastic lives under human care with keepers and trainers who love them, who are willing to dedicate blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that these animals were enriched, were engaged, were happy, and you just decided to rip them away and just drop them into the ocean because you at home decided that that was where they needed to be. Well, unfortunately, this is now going to be taking place with Lolita too, so we're going to have to wait and see exactly how her story takes place, but considering her advanced age and the fact that she has been under human care for so long and is already experiencing health issues, I'm sure it's going to go great. But the other side of the coin that apparently no one wants to talk about is the fact that Lolita is also going to be bringing with her pathogens from her current home. She is now going to be entering into a space containing wild orcas with potentially illnesses that those orcas have never been exposed to either. I talked a little bit earlier about Panamanian golden frogs, and I said I was going to come back to it a little bit. What wiped those frogs out was that fungus that was introduced to their environment that they had never been exposed to before, and it wiped them all out. That can easily happen again if the wrong pathogen is released into wild populations. This doesn't even mention the fact that the animal not only has to be concerned about pathogens, again, but we have to be worried about it catching its food properly. I briefly mentioned earlier Kiko. Now, Kiko is actually the killer whale that was featured in the movie Free Willy. It was a big victory for the animal rights advocates when Kiko was ultimately released back into the oceans again. Kiko was brought in from the wild in 1979 and was ultimately released back into the ocean in 2002. After only a year of being free in the ocean, 2003, Kiko died from pneumonia. Once again, illnesses happen even in the wild. But even outside of that, this animal lived under human care for 23 years. It lasted a year in the ocean after that. And the incredibly frustrating part about Kiko's story is people still hail her as a success. Why? Because they did exactly what I said they were going to do at the beginning of the video. They dropped him back in the ocean, and they stopped caring about what happened after that. Because it's not about a victory for the whale, it's about a victory for the people who think that the whale doesn't belong under human care. They don't care how long the animal lives afterwards. They did a good deed by taking him away from the people who were caring for him. And Kiko, in case you were curious, never fully reacclimated to life in the ocean. Despite being hailed as a complete success, Kiko never successfully reintegrated into a wild pod of orcas. He lived that entire year of his life alone, likely scared, likely confused, wondering why he was in this unfamiliar environment and why the people who had cared for him for a huge chunk of his life were no longer around anymore. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, Animals do have the capacity to feel fear, confusion, and things of that nature. And if you want proof of that an animal can feel those kinds of things, you need to look no further than Kiko's story. Kiko lived for a single year in the wild before ultimately passing away. That is very telling, or at least it should be very telling. These animals don't do well when they are reintroduced into the oceans again. You are going to kill her. Oh, better dead in the wild than live in captivity. And yes, I've actually heard people say that before, and oh my gosh. If you genuinely believe that an animal is better dead than under human care, where it can reach hundreds, thousands, millions of people who will get to experience that animal, be inspired to want to protect marine life, to want to get involved in environmental protection, I don't really know how to help you. Like, saying that an animal is better off dead than providing this incredible joy to people, being able to live these enriching lives, like, it blows my mind. I don't understand this perspective at all. I really don't. And yeah, I am a living example that that theory works. During my childhood, my family and I would visit a lot of our local aquariums and zoos. When we went on vacation, it was a big deal when I got to visit zoos and aquariums that I'd never been to before. It was these places that let me get close and really experience the animals that I had grown up reading about in books, seeing on TV. Yes, those resources are still available, but it's not the same as getting to stand next to these incredible animals. And now that I live in Florida, right around the corner from SeaWorld, what has become one of the most controversial parks in the US, guys, there's no comparison to being able to stand next to an orca. It's a majestic, beautiful animal, and it breaks my heart to a degree I can't express to you, to see these animals being ripped away from their handlers and just thrown out into the ocean where people can pat themselves on the back, say they did a good deed, and not care about what happens after that. These animals do inspire real people. I am an environmental sciences major. I've dedicated my entire professional career to wanting to protect the world around me, the world that we share, the world that these animals live in, because of the good that zoos and aquariums have done. My time in the field has been incredibly enlightening. Seeing all of the conservation work that these organizations do, all of the programs they support, the partners that they have, who help these animals, not only under their care, but help the animals in the wild, protecting those populations, discouraging poaching, trying to stop deforestation. All of these things are things that create very real, genuine good for these species. I mean, if you really want to be honest with ourselves, most of what we know about orca populations, we only know because of what we have learned from organizations like SeaWorld. They have done so much incredible research on these animals to reveal the mystery of their lives to us, how they live, what they do, how they think. Just a couple of years ago, SeaWorld announced that they weren't going to be doing their breeding programs anymore, and that really, really bothered me. I didn't have a platform to talk about it then, so there was no video from me about that. But it really does still break my heart that they're not going to be breeding any more orcas. We've just gained so much good from the incredible work that these places have done, and I hate to see it go. It's such an incredible blow to conservation, and honestly, if you want to know the differences between the sides of people who are either for or against Lolita's release, as I mentioned, we've already talked about, we have a football coach and PETA on the side of releasing Lolita. Who do we have on the side of keeping her where she is? I don't know. How about the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration? Yeah, NOAA. The people who actually monitor wild populations and weather patterns. The people whose job it is to know what's best for a lot of these animals. They want to see her stay where she is because they know how detrimental it would be for the animal's health to move her. The move alone could potentially kill her at her advanced age. Yeah, but who really cares about that, right? As long as she's not under human care anymore, that's what's really important. As I mentioned, guys, I'm sorry. I knew I was going to get heated and probably a little aggressive in this video. I am truly sorry. And I'm sure there will probably be some nasty comments letting me know that I'm wrong in so many ways in the comments below. And that's completely fine. Honestly, again, I want to encourage you guys to have a discussion on this topic because this topic is so much deeper than just, I watched Blackfish and now I know that orcas shouldn't be under human care anymore. You have to remember where your information is coming from. Everyone has biases. Everybody has their own agendas. In the case of people for the ethical treatment of animals, that alternative agenda is going to basically just be no animal should ever be under human care ever. They don't really know anything about the conditions that animals live under. They don't really know anything about animal husbandry. They don't know about enrichment. They don't know what goes into keeping these animals. They don't know any of that. All that they really care about is they believe animals shouldn't be under human care. Therefore, animals shouldn't be under human care. One last little discussion piece for you guys. There are plenty of things you guys can look for to see whether or not an animal is doing well in captivity. Because yes, again, there are going to be organizations out there that don't treat their animals very well, and you absolutely should protest some of those organizations. But just because those organizations exist, it doesn't mean that all of them out there function the same way. There are a lot of organizations such as SeaWorld and the Miami Seaquarium who go above and beyond for the animals under their care. They do phenomenal work. And you know that the animals there are doing well because they're thriving, because they're living these longer lives, because they're reproducing. If you want an example of how you can prove that the antithesis of this fact is true, have you ever wondered why there aren't any great white sharks held under human care? There are actually whale sharks, a larger species that have successfully lived under human care, but despite multiple attempts, we've actually never successfully had great whites stay alive in aquariums. The big reason for that is there are factors that great whites seem to need that we can't properly meet. If you don't meet an animal's proper needs, it's not going to live long. And that has been proven true by multiple attempts at keeping great whites under human care. It really just doesn't work in the same way. There are species like vaquitas, like great whites, that unfortunately there's just something about them where they can't receive the care that they need in order to stay alive. There is visible proof that that is not the case for orcas. These animals are living longer lives. 57 is a long life for an orca. Can orcas live longer? Yes, of course they can. The average life expectancy for humans would be probably between, I would imagine, 75 and 85 years old, maybe a little older, but obviously there's going to be cases where humans can live even longer. Humans can live into their hundreds if the conditions are right. Same is true for orcas. Obviously, there's going to be outstanding circumstances where these animals will live obviously longer lives in the wild, but you can't look at those extreme circumstances and apply them to all cases. When a lot of animals in the wild have a higher mortality rate, they die earlier because they have to deal with a lot of factors that don't exist when these animals live under human care. Ugh, anyways, yeah, that's about it, guys. I'm done with my rant. I'm off my soapbox. If you guys do want to have more of a discussion, you guys are more than welcome to leave comments down below. I'll get to as many of them as I can. I'm a very small YouTuber, so I don't expect that this video is going to reach a ton of people. But if you want to discuss further some of the things that I've talked about, or have questions, or want to bring up points that maybe I didn't get to, I know that there are people on both sides of this discussion who are incredibly passionate and very, very fervently have strong opinions on whether or not these animals should or should not be under human care, and that is completely fine. At the end of the day, what I really want to make sure I'm pitching to you guys, for all of you who don't want these animals to be suffering, I want you to understand you are on the same side as me and everybody else who is in favor of these animals staying under human care. We should be working together to find the places that are not meeting the proper care standards for their animals and making sure that those animals are taken better care of. There are places that need to be protested, but SeaWorld simply isn't one of them. Neither is Miami Seaquarium, guys. Lolita has lived an amazing life. Her keepers love her, her keepers care for her, and you are ripping her away from her caretakers. I promise you, if those caretakers, even for a moment, thought that these animals were in fact suffering or miserable under their care, they would not be in the field that they're in. These people give up all of their time, all of their energy, because they love these animals just as much, more likely more, than you do. They love these animals so much. You can't work around animal care staff and not see just how much they care about the animals under their care. My suggestion to you guys, talk to these animal caretakers. Reach out to them. Visit these places. See the conditions the animals are in. Ask questions. You can ask the difficult questions to the caretakers. They're going to have the answers you're looking for. Don't let yourself hear an emotionally driven hit piece like Blackfish and allow that to dictate your entire perspective. Do the research on your own. Try to find unbiased sources and remember where these sources are coming from. Anyway, guys, that's going to about do it for today. Thank you all for those of you who stuck around this long in the video. I apologize for getting a bit heated there. Again, I am truly sorry for that. I'm sorry if I offended anybody. I do want to hear from you guys, though. Leave comments down below. Keep the conversation going. With that, guys, I'm an avid herpetologist. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.